September 26, 1983, 12:14 a.m., a Soviet nuclear bunker outside Moscow. An alarm goes off that nobody ever wanted to hear. The screen in front of duty officer Stanislav Petrov lights up with a single word that made his blood run cold. Launch. The computer was telling him that the United States had just fired a nuclear missile at the Soviet Union. He had minutes to decide what to do. If he reported it to his superiors, the Soviet response would be automatic and immediate. Dozens of nuclear missiles heading back toward America within minutes. America would respond, and within the hour the world as every living person knew it would cease to exist. His hand moved toward the phone. Then he stopped. Something didn't feel right. What happened in the next 23 minutes is the most important story you have probably never heard. Because if Stanislav Petrov had made a different decision that night, you might not be here to watch this video. To understand why Stanislav Petrov hesitated when every protocol told him not to, you first have to understand who he was. Stanislav Yevgrafovich Petrov was born in 1939. In the Soviet Union, he grew up in the shadow of World War II, a generation shaped by the devastation of a conflict that had killed 27 million Soviet citizens. He joined the Soviet Air Defense Forces and proved himself an intelligent and methodical officer. Not a hero by nature. Not someone who sought attention or drama. Just a competent, careful man who did his job well. By 1983 he was a lieutenant colonel. He worked at Serpukhov 15, a secret Soviet bunker south of Moscow that monitored American missile launches via satellite. His job was straightforward on paper. Monitor the satellite data. If the system detected an American missile launch, report it immediately to his superiors. They would take it from there. What his job description did not account for was what he should do if he thought the system might be wrong. Nobody had written protocols for that. Because nobody was supposed to question the system. To understand how close the world came to ending that September night, you need to understand how terrifyingly tense 1983 actually was. The Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union had reached a level of paranoia and hostility that had not been seen since the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. In March 1983, President Ronald Reagan had called the Soviet Union an evil empire in a speech that sent shockwaves through Moscow. Days later, he announced the Strategic Defense Initiative, a plan to build a missile defense shield in space that the Soviets believed was actually a first-strike weapon. Soviet leadership was genuinely convinced that America was planning a nuclear first strike. They had launched a secret intelligence operation called Ryan, specifically designed to detect the early signs of an American nuclear attack. Every Soviet military officer was on edge. Every unusual American military movement was analyzed for signs of imminent attack. Then on September 1, 1983, just 25 days before that night in the bunker, a Soviet jet shot down Korean Airlines Flight 7. A civilian passenger jet, 269 people killed. The international outrage was enormous. Relations between America and the Soviet Union hit their lowest point in decades. The world was a hair trigger, and Stanislav Petrov was sitting at the trigger. September 26, 1983, Stanislav Petrov was at his duty station, a routine shift. Nothing unusual. At 12:14 a.m., the sirens went off. The satellite monitoring system was reporting a missile launch. One American intercontinental ballistic missile detected, heading toward the Soviet Union. Petrov's training kicked in immediately. He began running through the checklist. He notified his superiors that an alert had been detected. He began assessing the data, then the system updated. Not one missile, 2, then 3. Then 4. The system was now showing 5 American nuclear missiles inbound toward the Soviet Union. The warning level had jumped to its highest possible level. The word on his screen was unambiguous. Launch, launch, launch. Launch, launch. Launch, launch. Every protocol Petrov had been trained to follow was clear. This was exactly what the system was designed to detect. Immediately, let the chain of command respond. His superiors were already calling him, demanding a report. Was this real? Was America attacking? Petrov looked at his screens. And he made a decision that had no basis in his training manuals. He decided to think. 23 minutes, that is how long Stanislav Petrov had before the Soviet military would need a definitive answer before the window for a retaliatory strike would begin to close. In those 23 minutes, Petrov did something that went against everything his training had told him to do. He started questioning the system. His first thought was this: if America was launching a nuclear first strike, why only 5 missiles? The United States had thousands of nuclear warheads. A real first strike would be hundreds of missiles simultaneously. Not 5. 5 missiles made no strategic sense. His second thought was the satellite system itself. It was relatively new. It had not been fully tested under all conditions. Could there be a malfunction? Could something else be triggering the sensors? He looked at his ground radar stations. They were not confirming the launches. The satellites were showing missiles. The ground radar was showing nothing. In Soviet nuclear protocol, ground radar confirmation was supposed to accompany satellite detection. There was no ground confirmation. Something was wrong with the data. But Petrov had no way to be certain. He had no way to know for sure. He was working with incomplete information, screaming alarms, superiors demanding answers, and 23 minutes to decide whether civilization would continue. He picked up the phone. He told his superiors it was a false alarm. The minutes after Petrov made that call were the longest of his life. If he was wrong, if American missiles were genuinely inbound, the Soviet Union would have lost its window for retaliation. The most devastating military failure in history would be his responsibility. If he was right, if the system had malfunctioned, he had just prevented the accidental start of World War III. He sat at his station and waited. The missiles never arrived. The investigation that followed revealed what had actually happened. The Soviet satellite system had malfunctioned. Sunlight reflecting off clouds at a specific angle had been misread by the satellite sensors as missile launch signatures. 5 separate false readings, all triggered by the same atmospheric phenomenon. The system designed to prevent nuclear war had nearly caused one, and the only thing standing between that malfunction and the end of civilization had been one man who decided to think instead of react. Stanislav Petrov had been right. You might expect that a man who prevented World War III would be celebrated, given a medal, honored by his nation. That is not what happened to Stanislav Petrov. The Soviet military did not celebrate him. They could not. Celebrating Petrov would mean admitting that their nuclear early warning system had nearly triggered an accidental nuclear war. It would mean admitting that the system everyone had been told was foolproof had nearly fooled itself into ending civilization. So instead, they did something that tells you everything about how power works. They reprimanded him. Petrov was criticized for failing to properly document what had happened during the incident, for not filling in his logbooks correctly while he was busy trying to prevent World War III. He was reassigned, quietly, to a less sensitive position. He took early retirement shortly after. And then something even more extraordinary happened. For the next decade, nobody outside a small circle of Soviet military insiders knew what Stanislav Petrov had done. The incident was classified, hidden. A secret the Soviet Union was not prepared to share with the world. Petrov went home. He lived quietly. He gardened. He looked after his wife who was seriously ill. And he told nobody. In 1998, a retired Soviet military officer published a book about the incident. For the first time, the world outside the Soviet military found out what had happened on September 26, 1983. The story exploded. Journalists tracked down Stanislav Petrov. He was living in his small apartment outside Moscow, retired, modest, completely unaware that the world was about to discover who he was. When reporters arrived at his door, he was genuinely puzzled by the attention. He did not consider himself a hero. He was careful to say that repeatedly in every interview he gave. He said, "I was simply doing my job. I had a feeling. I made a decision. Any other officer might have done the same thing, but the world disagreed, because any other officer might very well not have done the same thing. The protocols said report it. The training said report it. The screaming alarms said report it. Every superior on the phone was demanding he report it. Stanislav Petrov alone decided to think first, and that thinking, that one act of independent human judgment in a system designed to remove human judgment, may have saved every person alive on Earth today." Once the world knew who Stanislav Petrov was, the recognition began to arrive. In 2004, he received the World Citizen Award in the United States. He traveled to America, the country whose missiles his system had falsely detected, and was honored by the very nation that had almost been on the receiving end of a Soviet nuclear response. In 2006, he was honored at the United Nations in New York. In 2013, he received the Dresden Peace Prize in Germany. A documentary film was made about him called The Man Who Saved the World. He attended premieres, he gave interviews. He shook hands with politicians and dignitaries. And through all of it, he remained the same modest, puzzled man, who could not quite understand why everyone was making such a fuss. But there was a shadow over these final years of recognition. His wife Reza, the woman he had cared for through years of serious illness, had died in 1997. Just 1 year before the world found out what her husband had done. She never knew. The woman who had shared her life with the man who saved the world never got to see the world acknowledge it. Petrov rarely spoke about this publicly. But those who knew him said it was the one thing he never fully made peace with. Here is the power play and twisted truth at the heart of this story. The Soviet Union built the most sophisticated nuclear early warning system in the world. They spent billions of rubles. They trained thousands of officers. They created protocols designed to remove human error from the equation. And the system nearly destroyed the world because it removed too much humanity from the equation. The twisted truth is this. The most advanced nuclear defense system ever built was saved not by its technology, but by one man who decided to ignore it. Stanislav Petrov was not supposed to think. He was supposed to report. The entire system was designed to make human judgment irrelevant, to create an automatic chain of response that left no room for doubt or hesitation. But doubt and hesitation are not weaknesses. Sometimes they are the only things standing between civilization and catastrophe. The Soviet military punished Petrov for hesitating. History will remember him for it. Stanislav Petrov died on May 19, 2017. He was 77 years old. He died in his small apartment outside Moscow, quietly, without ceremony. It was several months before the outside world even found out he was gone. He left behind no great fortune. No military honors. Still full of people going about their ordinary days completely unaware of the night in 1983 when one man in a bunker decided to think instead of react. History's Wildside is about power plays and twisted truths. And here is the final twisted truth of Stanislav Petrov's story. The most important decision in human history was made not by a president or a general or a politician. It was made by a mid-level Soviet military officer on a night shift, a man who gardened, who loved his wife, who never considered himself a hero, a man who simply looked at the data and decided something wasn't right. And in doing so gave every single person watching this video the chance to be alive today. If that story doesn't make you stop and think about the ordinary people who shape history in extraordinary moments, then I don't know what will. Hit that subscribe button. Every Sunday on History's Wildside we bring you the moments, the decisions, and the people that history almost forgot. Power plays, twisted truths, and the ordinary people who changed everything. This has been History's Wildside. I will see you next Sunday.